organizations, we can provide a collective contribution. The group of the original four dreamers, the four musketeers, is composed today of a large spontaneous group, which from time to time meets together and check the progress, monitoring our good intentions and actions taken, and verify if we are shifting from talks into action. This is the reason why we are here today. Tomorrow, the logistics cluster in another session is going to discuss the call for action in more details. Now let me thank the Heriot-Watt University of Dubai, the European Union, the Kean University, Simon, our former IFRC colleague, just retired, but together with us today, then DP World and the colleagues of UNHCR and UNHRD. Now allow me to take 3 minutes only of your attention to accompany you in the ISC transition into the Dubai Humanitarian. Thank you so much.
From Dubai to the world, International Humanitarian City was born from a profound commitment to connect, serve, and support humanity. This is our history, our legacy, our story. And the best place to start a story is at the beginning. In 2003, International Humanitarian City was born. Built on the vision of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and ruler of Dubai, to extend a hand of hope across the globe. By 2007, we had become a pivotal hub, streamlining humanitarian aid to the farthest corners of the earth. In 2011, we reached our first major milestone, tripling in size and amplifying our capacity to serve and support disaster areas in times of need. 2015 brought with it the launch of a new strategy and the Global Humanitarian Impact Fund, setting a new course for sustainable humanitarian action. By 2020, we were not just responding to crises with exceptional efforts amidst COVID-19. The introduction of the Humanitarian Logistics Data Bank, Cold Chain Facility, and Kitting Center marked a giant leap towards efficiency and enhanced preparedness on a global scale. Last year, in 2023, we celebrated 20 years of humanitarian action, paving the way to major initiatives for the future. 2 decades of making a difference, of saving lives, of inspiring hope, and of empowering the world to be better prepared. Now, in 2024, we're embarking on the next chapter of our journey, from Dubai to the world. Dubai Humanitarian is a new frontier for humanitarian action, a platform to connect, drive innovation, and forge partnerships, all with the singular objective of enhancing humanitarian efforts across the globe. Our vision is clearer than ever before. We're extending our reach beyond the borders of the humanitarian sector, working with diverse partners. The launch of our Knowledge and Development Center heralds a new era of knowledge exchange, innovation and progress, empowering the future generation of humanitarian leaders with the know-how required to meet tomorrow's challenges head-on. Together, we're creating a global safety net, connecting humanitarian hubs worldwide for a more robust, more reactive, more sustainable humanitarian supply chain. so that aid gets where it's needed most, as it's needed. Now, with every initiative, every partnership, and every innovation, we're setting our sights further, not just on the needs of today, but on a safer, more sustainable, more empowered tomorrow. From Dubai to the world.
Thank you, Giuseppe. And of course, working together, we can achieve and we will achieve more. I would like to welcome now Mrs. Michela Matuella, Director of the Emergency Response Coordination Center in the Director General for ECHO. And I would like to express our heartfelt thanks for joining us in this session, which is, and your presence basically is a testimony of the importance of this subject and the commitment of ECHO and maybe other donors to help and push the humanitarian supply chain in order to be more sustainable. Please help me in welcoming Mrs. Matuella for her welcome remark. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very warm welcome. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you today. And I must say, I've taken over this function in DG ECHO just a few months ago, so very recently here. But I must say, it did not take me long to understand the importance of this topic that is discussed today in this context. It's clear we see what is happening around us. We see the challenges that stem from climate change. I think that this video and the introductory words that we have just heard emphasize that. And it's clear the impact that the climate change has on the situation for our humanitarian work. And therefore, looking at sustainable humanitarian supply chain is absolutely fundamental, whether we look at floods in Pakistan, droughts in the Horn of Africa, but also looking at the European Union itself, the many challenges that we face every month. The humanitarian and environmental crisis, I know it is very clear to all of you, are very, very closely connected. The deterioration of soil and land due to deforestation, overexploitation is clearly having an impact on food security, on livelihoods, and therefore pushing more people into hunger and dependency on aid. The numbers that we see are frightening. By 2050, over 200 million people could need humanitarian assistance as a result of climate-related disasters. This is a very telling figure, and is a figure that tells us clearly we cannot afford to do nothing. And I must say in DG ECHO, which is the department of the Commission that deals with humanitarian aid, we have very clearly in mind this, not only because of our response capacity and how we need to deal with the response capacity, but also because we need to work on our preparedness. And maybe just a word, let's say, also from our perspective, and also taking a little bit, let's say, the view from the role that I have within DG ECHO, within the Commission, which is being the director of the Emergency Response Coordination Center. We have just gone through a reorganization of our center, essentially to do, in a way, two things. One is to put more strongly, let's say, together the link between our humanitarian work and our civil protection work, because very often we have to use different tools to basically address the different emergencies and the disasters that we are facing. but also looking at developing within the center much more the analytical capacity, the preparedness capacity to basically be able to face what seems to be clearly the challenges in the future. Here we are focusing on climate change, but of course we see many other challenges around. To be successful in our objective to control the environmental harm, we have clearly different ways of addressing. There is one important element, which is the topic of today. The supply chain represents between 40 and 60% of greenhouse gas emissions of humanitarian organizations. It's clear that there is a great potential there. Supply chain and logistics also plays a major role in the environmental impact of humanitarian aid beyond emissions from upstream. Raw materials and manufacturing, last mile transport, distribution in the field, I mean, just to mention some of them, waste from packaging, etc. It is increasingly clear that the humanitarian supply chain is cross-cutting, is highly operational, provides a concrete framework and tools into which many humanitarian priorities, such as greening and localization, can be incorporated, tracked, measured, and improved upon. It is therefore important, an important unifying lever in making humanitarian aid sustainable. The humanitarian community must therefore come together. This is a very good example of that. So I welcome very much the focus that is put in this session, because we really need to work together to make the most of the opportunity that comes from revising the way we work on our humanitarian supply chain. So we need to really look at the common problems, and looking together at the common problems will certainly help us finding common solutions. In ECHO, in the Commission, we have really taken this very seriously. And we are really trying to make this a priority. We are started important discussions also within the humanitarian community. This was also a very important topic in the very recent humanitarian forum, and thank you also to all those that contributed to that discussion. So there are many different tracks of work that we can cooperate together. I think that there is also an important element coming from digitalization. We have different tools here. The enterprise resource planning software, for instance, is a concrete example of what can be done in this sense, to basically have end-to-end real-time view of the organization supply chain. Tracking is the norm in the private sector, and therefore we should also follow the good examples that come from the private sector, and we should do the same. Having data on each step of the supply chain is power in our hands, and it can really give us the information needed to increase the sustainability. It can open the pathway to making supply chain data interoperable, meaning huge optimizations are clearly possible. And we can see which organizations have what items and where. Organizations can then cooperate to make sure the right items are in the right place, reducing the need for emergency flights and the extra emissions that these would bring. The UNHRD network and the emergency supply pre-positioning strategy are already working on how to aggregate data to show where there are gaps or imbalances in relief item stockpiles. So this more strategic approach opens the door to more concrete forms of joint working in procurement and pooling of resources such as transport, warehousing, fleet sharing. There are already very concrete examples of this in the humanitarian space and evidence that it brings cost savings and reduces environmental footprint. So we really believe that this should become the default approach wherever it is appropriate, as it allows for standards and approaches to sustainability to be worked on together and simplified. This approach has also the huge advantage of being able to contribute to the reduction of the funding gap. I was quite, when I started looking into this issue when I joined ECHO, as I said few months ago. I was quite impressed by the early results that came from initiatives such as the platform of NGOs HULO, that has already shown some very encouraging results, with 15% average savings from joint procurements done so far, with a model that is clearly highly scalable. So this demonstrates the great potential of our joint work. At the Humanitarian Forum, the European Humanitarian Forum that I just mentioned, that took place in Brussels just a few weeks ago in March, we committed as EU to facilitate further and high-level reflection on this important topic. There was a high-level panel that approached the topic, and there was a very clear interest and consensus on the importance of having a high-level discussion on this and to really give a push to this agenda. The objective is to raise this strategic consideration of a humanitarian supply chain to the boardroom to drive forward a paradigm shift in this area. It's when we make this a priority in all strands of our work that we can really turn it into a reality. So we are, in addition to, of course, push, let's say, the agenda by organizing a high-level, let's say, discussion on this topic. We are also looking within DG ECHO to see also how we can change our own paradigm of financing to make clear if this is a priority, there have to be implications also in the way we orient our own financing mechanism. So we will certainly play our role in the donors community because we want to really make, let's say, this a reality, and we want to move as fast as possible on this. More generally, on sustainability, the EU has stepped up to do its part also regarding its humanitarian assistance in line with the political priority of the European Green Deal. So this is for us also part, of course, of the broader policy priorities of the EU. So we look at this, of course, from many different angles, and this is clearly a top priority of the current Commission. And I think that I can comfortably expect that also the next Commission that will take office towards the end of the year will maintain that as a very important priority. In 2020, we adopted an approach to reducing the environmental footprint of humanitarian aid and adopted minimum environmental requirements, which are now mandatory since 2023. And this element of being mandatory is also very often what, of course, makes a difference. And of course, this requires political courage in the way, of course, certain priorities are set on the agenda. So we want to maintain, of course, this very ambitious approach. Recently, we developed also voluntary environmental indicators to help partners monitor the environmental performance of projects. And that is the starting point. I think, making criteria and requirements mandatory is, of course, important, but it's also important that this is also coming on the basis of a dialogue that creates an awareness, of course, of the importance of certain policy changes. So we want to increase in ambitions over time in our environmental policies, and we want to get to a point where we will require that partners have environmental management plans in place at organizational level. Before that, of course, we need to be clear, we need to assess, we need to have a dialogue, we need to make it feasible. And that, of course, is part of the process and part of the dialogue that we want to initiate. So, so we want to basically continue working together with all of you on these challenges. We want to set for ourselves ambitious goals. On the ECHO side, on the Commission side, we are ready. And I very much look forward to stepping up together our cooperation, but also improve the sustainability of the humanitarian supply chain in the most ambitious way. As I said before, we cannot afford to do nothing. And therefore, let's set for ourselves very ambitious goals. So thank you. And I look forward to the discussion. discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Matuella, and for the European Union's dedication to advancing sustainable humanitarian initiatives. Thank you very much. We definitely touch on several areas that the panel basically will be discussing now, maybe more on depth. Again, appreciate it. So I think now I can start introducing our esteemed panelists. And the panelist basically represents what we have been talking right now, is that the diverse of the community that we work with between private sector, we need the private sector expertise, we need the academia, we need the data, we need the innovative solutions, plus we need the humanitarian experience on ground. So this is basically what our panel represents, a diversified experience, which will definitely benefit all of us. Without any further delay, I would like to start presenting now Dr. Sarah Joseph, postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Humanitarian Logistics and Regional Development Court from Kunu University. Please have a seat. Mr. Shering Tekakara, Global Executive Vice President, Market Access, DP World Logistics. Mr. Benjamin Safari, Head of UNHCR Supply Management Service. Dr. Simon Missiri, former I4C Special Representative and Director, Global Humanitarian Services and Supply Chain Management. Mr. Walid Brahim, he got the lottery because he has two roles. He will be a panelist and co-moderator. Thank you very much, Walid. And at last, our special welcome goes to Professor Nika Salvetti, visiting professor at Heriot-Watt University, Dubai, who is moderating this exceptional panel remotely with the cooperation with Walid. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for time. Thank you for the trip. And I think we can start. Professor Nika, floor is yours.
I'm here. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Clear, okay. Just give me a sign if, I don't know, my communication is disrupted. So first of all, welcome everybody. I'm sorry not to be in presence there, but I'm sure that we can manage with this advanced technology to have a very interesting, I would say, discussion and panel. First of all, I would like to reiterate a bit in a way, the journey that what Giuseppe called the Musketeer have been undertook in these last few years. What I learned is that since Budapest in 2022, a group of actually sectoral group of stakeholders raised the concern and shared the concern about the supply chain in the humanitarian field. And since then, they have reiterated their commitment to actually take action and concretely. So they have been, in a way, embracing this journey of exploration, reviewing their practices, and actually, I would say, reaching a different level of maturity, but also, I would say, very much stronger sense of team working, which is at the base of, I would say, of a stronger cooperation. Now, I think the group reached a moment in which it especially has been reinforced and reiterated during the COP28, in which they stress the urgency to take action now on a wider scale, and also in collaboration with all different key stakeholders along the supply chain. And it's important to recognize that the group is quite aware of the problem. It understands also its core responsibility and is ready to commit to address sustainability challenges along the supply chain. So the purpose, I would say, of this today panel is indeed to move ahead by reiterating the sense of urgency and commitment and to identify potential direction of engagement. So stating that, I would like to start to, I would say, first question for all panelists, in which I'm asking, having explored the potential opportunity and challenges of building a sustainable humanitarian supply chain, how would you define it? And what is the ultimate goal that you would like to attain? And adding on that as a sort of sub-question, so far, what would be the fundamental condition for a sustainable humanitarian supply chain to operate effectively?
Thank you, Nika. Shall we start maybe from Sarah? From the academic world, what is your perspective on what Nika is challenging us with?
Sure. Is this, yeah, you can hear it? Okay. Well, so if we think first of what the definition of sustainability is that you can continue to do the same thing for an indefinite amount of time in the same process. So the idea is that what we're doing today, we're not compromising the ability of our grandchildren, future grandchildren, not only in our family, but throughout the globe to have the same process. So that's the ideal. There's a big difference between what is happening and actually what the ideal is. And I think, so I'm certainly not the level of humanitarian experience as my colleagues here, but I've been working in environment sustainability for 12 years. And we see already a big shift in mindset and a big shift in initiative and drive and motivation. And I already would say from my perspective that this is moving in the right direction. It's hard to say where it's at now and how to define what's sustainable, but moving in that direction of this ultimate goal is, I would say that's for me a sustainable supply chain.
Thank you, Sarah. So Sharing, from the private sector perspective, you've definitely in many ways ahead of the curve when it comes to some of the entities on the humanitarian side. So really looking forward to your insight.
Thanks, Walid. I hope you can hear me, Professor. So thanks a lot, Sarah, for the wonderful definition of what we should try and achieve when we are talking sustainability. So, I think it's very good that we currently have all the representatives of the players in sustainability in this room, right? Whether it is the government, whether it is the beneficiaries, whether it is private sector, academia, all of us have to work together. So in DP world, what we look at is a culture of sustainability, right? It has to touch each part of what we do. It's not a drive from my sustainability colleagues. It has to filter down to all of our operations. So what we try to analyze when we look at sustainability is which are the 3 points at which supply chain challenges are, whether it's with sourcing, whether it is with transportation, or is it at the end consumption. Michela was talking about traceability and digitization. Now, these are things that as private sector, we have to be very responsible about when we deal with our private sector clients. So we do develop a lot of data and technology to ensure that these responsible distribution and downstream route to markets are maintained, right? Now, why can't we leverage that into humanitarian sector so that the impact that we create is assessed and then addressed, right? The second bit is, how do we ensure that our supply chain, our transportation systems, our hubs and spokes can be better utilized, so that we can do more of localization and more regionalization. And we are investing in regionalization of our assets much more vigorously now to address these needs. So some of the objectives about this is, there are producers, there are providers, there are users, there are regulators. All of this ecosystem has to come together to address the challenge that we all have, because the impact that humanitarian supply chain creates should not take away from the benefit that the humanitarian efforts provide, right? So this is what our collective and shared responsibility is. So this is what we are working towards. Thank you.
Ben, over to you. You're on this side of the fence.
Okay. Hopefully this one works. Yes, good. Thanks very much, Professor. Thank you, colleagues. I have a very personal aspect when I approach the topic of sustainability, and it's not just because I'm a supply chain professional. It's not just because the UN Refugee Agency probably is the largest buyer of plastic-based items for its clients or for the people we work for. It's not because well, it's probably more because I was born in a very nice place. And there was an idyllic situation where I never had to think about the weather. I never had to think about the climate. When it rained really nicely. When it was sunny, the sun was gentle on your skin. And whereas, you know, I can't say I want to go back there, but I want all of us and the humanity in general, whether it's us in Geneva, whether it's the people in Dubai, whether it's the people in Bangladesh, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in the Sahel, to not have to worry about climate. So that to me would be like the ultimate ideal end game. But before we focus on the end game, you know, let's perhaps look at the journey, because the journey is also exciting. We are at a very pivotal moment of the humanitarian supply chain work. I said it last year in Dubai. 2023 should be remembered as a moment when we decided that we cannot just address the issues of today. We cannot just respond to humanitarian emergencies, thinking about the people that we are assisting, thinking perhaps about our colleagues and making it easy, thinking about the supply chain from ordering to delivering and paying the suppliers. We cannot continue to do it that way. We need to start thinking about also future generations. We need to start thinking not just about the product when it's in our supply chain, but think about it in terms of how long can it be used for? How repairable is it? How recyclable the ingredients that make it are? That's the journey. And I want to, you know, maybe as much as I want to go back to my childhood, I also want to really think about, you know, what's important now is the journey that we take. I know we are managing a supply chain. We started this journey in UNHCR a couple of years ago on our own, but we started actually with a plan to do something small, demonstrate that it's possible, and then expand both internally and externally, because only if we are together as an ecosystem of humanitarians, we can make it work. And a year and a half, 2 years later, there was the Budapest meeting, there was a number of Dubai meetings. We are all sitting here, part of the humanitarian organizations, part of suppliers, academics, government donors, etc., discussing the same purpose and really thinking about how we make this work better, not just for today, but also for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Simon, you have the privilege of, I know it's been really, really short, but you've got the privilege to look at this a bit from the outside now, after your extensive career with IFRC and with the added challenge of having to interact with several entities spread out all over the world in the form of your national societies. Going back to Nika's question, challenge, what was the most problematic and challenging journey, if you wish, as you were looking at introducing sustainable supply chains within IFRC?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Walid. Thank you, Nika. On the sustainability, maybe just a very general remark. We as an industry, humanitarian industry, are by far not the biggest polluter of the planet. That's for sure. We are a bridge. We're a bridge with those who produce the relief goods, those who transport it, and then the people who actually receive them. That's our role. Of course, through our own activity, we also can improve things just through our activity. But being the bridge and not the biggest polluter, in fact, puts us in a very special spot, because we know, because we are with those people who are suffering most from adverse effects of climate change. And I think it's a huge responsibility on our shoulders to be advocates, to work with the industries, to work with the transporters, to ensure our own planning, our own optimization in terms of how we do things, how we join up our efforts, how we be more rational in our decisions, which have material consequences on the climate change. That's the main challenge. And we discussed it before in our previous meetings, the very difficult dilemma between immediacy of the need and sometimes critical life-saving need to do something, and then being sustainable. And we've seen so many times as practitioners when we are compromising our, or not even thinking enough about our sustainability because we're driven by the need to save somebody's life. It's a very difficult one. There are a few things we can do to improve that. But this bridge, again, I come back to this point, the bridge role puts us in a very, very special spot of responsibility where we can lead by example, where we can influence together with our very powerful partners, the donor community. I will say a few words about the European Union, which is a great partner in setting up standards and so on, and others representing people, again, who are suffering most from what's happening on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And before I'm handing over the award to you, back to you, Nika, I just wanted to perhaps offer my own thoughts on this, because I think we are in a situation in the humanitarian supply chain where the biggest challenges will be to integrate and streamline sustainability in what we do. Today, we're getting there. I think the realization of the problem and the fact that we cannot sit on the fence anymore is there. We are conscious of the problem. What I see to be the biggest challenges, because going back a bit to what you were saying, Sarah, before, is that we will have to re-achieve the point where sustainability is not an afterthought, but it's part of your entire supply chain planning, and it doesn't come as a cherry on the cake. A one point of the supply chain, but it's part of it, and eventually it would culminate. I would hope into policies, as we have done in previous years for many other things. I mean, if just to take an example, today in any UN contract, you will see a clause that speaks about child labor and how that cannot be. Cannot engage with suppliers under those circumstances. And eventually, in one way or form, we will have to come to a similar policy where those paradigms are listed out, and then we will be able to interact alongside the supply chain according to those. Nika, back to you.
Thank you so much. So, well, fascinating discussion, and thank you for sharing your inputs. Just to, in a way, to summarize and then link it to the second question. Yes, indeed, I would agree with Dr. Jones about there is a fantastic momentum now that I think we should grab, and a momentum is not only seen and I would say experienced by the humanitarian sector, but I would say everywhere, where we do understand and recognize that sustainability is an issue that has to be integrated and considered part of, we call it a DNA of any operation strategy, no matter the field it is. And I think we are reaching there. I think there is much, I would say, generally speaking, also from research and studies, I think the consensus is there. Now, of course, the next step is, as Walid said and Ben, is how we translate it. So how we move from this, I would say, reconnection, and I would say partly commitment to concrete action that would make a general, I would say, shift from, I would say, more traditional, let's talk like this, supply chain to much more sustainable, and I would say front-running supply chain that could really address, hopefully, the dream of Ben of saying not to worry about climate in the next future. But then, summarizing on that, I would like then to go back to what Simon said. So they actually, we can say in general terms, the major challenge of finding or navigate this trade-off between the humanitarian needs, especially for survival, and sustainability needs, especially the negative impact that certain action operation might actually have and have actually, especially in a host country or the country where the humanitarian supply chain operates. And this is I would like to raise this question specifically to Simon, Ben and Walid, but no matter also the other, Professor Jones and Shering, please add in if you have other comments or inputs. And especially from Simon, Ben and Walid, I would like to hear, okay, being aware of this trade-off, how your organization have been actually dealing with that. And if you can share good example in which you were able actually to navigate this trade-off in a more, I would say, effective way.
Gentlemen, we'll start. Ben.
Sure. Yeah. You know, the challenge with going first is that you have to think quickly on your feet. But in UNHCR, we have developed a new supply chain strategy. And the strategy recognizes and wants to focus on three things. Thing one is that colleagues told us that supply chain rules and policies and guidelines and processes are so complicated that we are very slow. And we know that. We know supply chain is not a simple matter. There are many issues that we need to address, especially when you're managing a public funded supply chain. You need to be careful about several things. But it doesn't have to be difficult for colleagues. So our new supply chain strategy wants to focus on simple for colleagues. We want to make it simple. The second goal is to make it swift or fast. We want to get there quickly because, as you rightly said, it's often a matter of life or death. So they said if you order something from a factory, from a manufacturer, often it takes a month, 2 months, 3 months. It has to come by boat. It has to be manufactured. It has to be then transitioning into so many ports and warehouses, etc., before it gets there. We need to be faster. That's why we need to prepare better. So that's our objective number 2. Colleagues didn't tell us about the third objective, but because we know that UNHCR in particular buys the largest amount of plastic, responds to a large number of emergencies, addresses issues of people in their immediate needs, but then those people need to then either go back home or resettle in a third country or go back to making their lives as they were. So all of those plastic tarpaulins, all of the plastic sheetings, all of the tents that we deliver somehow end up somewhere in the middle of wherever the emergency was. And so we thought that cannot continue. We want to make our supply chain also sustainable. And so as you're asking me the question as to how do we address the trade-offs between the urgency of responding to emergencies and then the need for future generations, we have done away with making that a trade-off by making sure that in every time we are responding to a humanitarian need, we are also at the same time thinking about the humanitarian needs and the life needs of those children and grandchildren and this world that we all share. So for us, it's not really a trade-off, and we are making every possible step we can to remove that from being something that we have to think about by thinking about it ahead of time as part of the strategizing, the planning, the preparedness, the procurement process, the instructions we give to our suppliers, the way we behave in our organizations, and all the decisions we make need to consider those three things. Even if it's urgent, it doesn't have to be at the expense of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Simon?
No, thank you very much. IFRC, which I used to work with until last week, is a big organization. There's 191 Red Cross or Red Crescent National Society in 191 countries. With a total turnover annually of about 45 billion Swiss francs, euro, of which about 1 billion only, plus minus, it depends on the year, goes into the international relief and development activities. So the majority of our turnover, the biggest part of our turnover, is actually at home, including countries like Switzerland, like Japan, like anywhere in the world. And that's where actually the main impact of, let's say, emissions and pollutions take place. Of course, national societies are regulated by the countries where they are working. So in Switzerland, you would imagine Swiss Red Cross is very well regulated and very green in many ways. But the majority of the national societies are not. So recognizing this biggest impact component, because you need to address the biggest first, right? I think it's very important to look at the where you have biggest impact. We created a supply chain strategy which covers the globe, 191 countries. And it's based on, we're at the very beginning of implementation, very beginning of it. It's based on things like pool procurement, for instance, like rationalized stocks management. If you go to Chinese Red Cross, it has 800 warehouses. You know, average size would be average size of the WFP or maybe even DP World warehouse, and so on and so forth. To do that, you need to create not just incentive, but a tool. So we were working with the great help of our corporate partners to create a digital platform which would be helping to rationalize stocks management, procurement decisions, you know, forward-looking procurement, and ultimately planning. That in itself actually would make, we reckon, one of the biggest impacts in terms of how we operate and on our sustainability. As I said, it's the beginning of the journey only, and it's very important actually for all of us in the humanitarian sector, together with the universities, with the academia, and with our great corporate partners, to join, I strongly believe, forces along these lines, because it is creating this critical mass with the tools and with the incentives, but also with the punishments. Yeah, I think, again, I'm looking at the European Union. I mean, incentives are also punishment, right? So I think it's very important to start thinking about greening labels. I mean, we have by EU standards a label. I'm talking about IFRC, Humanitarian Procurement Center, for instance. You need to go through grueling process of getting that label, procurement center, recognized by EU. I think we should go further. So we should, with the help of our governments, with the support from the corporate sector, to start setting up industry standard, so that we could actually certify our entities, we could certify our warehouses, we could certify our procurement processes with I mean, let's think about a good label, but it should be something like which says you're recognized, you're certified. And that would be a major step, I think, forward in terms of implementing what we all agreed is a very important thing for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I think it's a very interesting moment, the one we're in, because the world of sustainability is obviously so intricate, depending on where you're standing. I mean, even in the general discussions of the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 emissions, what is my tier 3 is your tier 1. So everyone needs to blend into this new discussion with its own bit. We all know inside our own houses what we can do to make things better. I generally think that the level of maturity is growing, but we're still very much at a very early stage. I would imagine that for the most of us in the humanitarian sector, we are really at the measurement phase. We have recognized, as I said before, the problem, but in order to capture any improvement, we need to establish the benchmark. We need to establish where we're starting from, to then understand how much progress are we making, whether it's with the stocks, whether is it with our own infrastructures and the way we manage them, or whether it's with our tier 3 or your tier 1, the way we engage with suppliers. Trade-offs, going back to your question, Nick, I think they'll always be there. I mean, in the line of work that we are, there will be always moments where you will have to find that balance between responding fast, because you need to save lives, but quickly understanding where that needs to be sort of phased out for less polluting responses to kick in. You know, I'm obviously referring to flights. That's how we usually start our response during an emergency, flights. Would flights always go away? Probably not. Can flights be diminished in a response? Of course, with better planning. The UNHRD itself in a way, is a prepositioning effort as a platform, where by its own virtue, in a way, you are closing down to the regions where emergency happens and diminish your flying time if you have to fly to respond to an emergency. So these are all elements that are coming up at this stage. And as I said, I think measuring where we're starting from, is a very fundamental first step to be able to then quantify the improvements that we are all sort of, thriving towards. Maybe before we go back to Unica, so that you can keep us on schedule, maybe briefly from DP World and Sarah.
So this is a very interesting topic, right? So sustainability is in private organizations, it's a must, but it's also a lot of common sense. We recently did a hub.
Sorry, I'm in a meeting, but what about tomorrow? Yeah, okay.
Mute somebody.
Sorry.
Yeah, because I have a
so
meeting
as I was saying, a lot of work that we do is also to make things more economical, more agile.
Yeah.
For example, on cutting down on transportation needs, right? So like we put up a hybrid model recently for a kitting facility in Dubai. Now, normally products used to go all the way.
Thank you. I'm in the middle of a meeting, so I'm trying to do a million things at the same time. Okay, thank you so much. See you on Wednesday. Okay. Emma, too.
Sustainability is better common sense, and that investments will follow. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add quickly, when we talk about trade-offs, like saving lives, financial costs, these are very tangible. But the long-term costs of the environment and the linkage of the fact that climate change and conflict are the top drivers of humanitarian aid, and they're also linked in a vicious cycle. So the more that you have conflict, the more that you have emissions, the more that you're going to drive each other. And it's easier and to motivate yourself to first respond to what's tangible, what's in front of you, and it makes sense, saving lives, of course. But how do we get over time that it's systematically integrated into it? And for me, with the research that we've done, it's clear that it needs to be, sustainability needs to be systematic. It needs to be not something that you think of extra and ingrained into like quality, like technical specifications. And therefore you don't need to think about it when you don't have time, and also the planning and preparedness and having things there. So that's what I would add to that.
Thank you, Sarah. Perhaps, Nika, before coming back to you, I just wanted to see if anyone from on the room here has any questions or would like to have anything clarified. Please.
Good morning. My name is Kat. I'm from Federal Revenue of Brazil. I work in trade agreements. And what I see, my English is not so well, but I think you understand me. About plastic, for example, I think we have to improve the industry of plastic for another way, more sustainable. But what happened? The subdeveloped countries have to adaptate yourselves to produce another way of plastic, another alternative of plastic. but they are not so fast to accompanying this development. And some countries more rich are imposing barriers for trade. And this is very, very serious because can stop the exportation and cause a big crisis. So I give my contribution for reflecting about this point. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think you're bringing up a very interesting topic that probably would require a separate conference, because the legislative part of the emissions are really a monster of its own, and something that in our own backyards we are trying to also think of, because as we embark in our procurement actions and having sustainability at the base of it, it's clear that we cannot hold every supplier, let's say, in their specific parts of the world responsible according to the same levels of responsibilities. There is an element of national and regional legislation that needs to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, we will be cutting out from a big chunk of the world a lot of suppliers that would be unfair to sort of exclude them from the process just because their legislative processes in their own respective countries is at different levels. We'll be going against a lot of other principles, of local solutions and what is broadly referred to as localization. Please.
Have other thing. I think the solution is investing in technology, but have to give conditions, funds, money for the poor countries to adapt yourselves. And other point is not to make barriers in intellectual property, because you develop a technology, but this have not to pay to this technology if improve the environment that is collective. Okay.
Very controversial.
But we have, it's difficult, but we have to work in this direction.
Please.
Hello, my name is Paul. I just wanted to comment on one point, which was the aviation part. Thank you for all the panelists. I do agree that there have been a tremendous mindset in the change in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, in a specific aspect, which is aviation, I have seen a very little change from the humanitarian industry. I've been 30 years in humanitarian aviation and work with IFRC and WFP, but also ICC and UNICEF, and I've been service provider for MSF and several NGO. None up to today. There is zero requirement to have a fuel economical aircraft or an environmental aircraft or an aircraft with sustainable fuel or offset on engine emission. Nothing. You provide that, it's at your own cost, and you will probably lose the beat. And I think that's sad. We all know it's technologically fully possible. Every single Boeing or Airbus or even Ilyushin or Tupolev can fly today 100% CO2 neutral. It's totally technically possible. It's a question of political will and a question, of course, of money. And then even the European Union, when they came with a new legislation on aviation and environmental, they say that humanitarian doesn't need to apply that. So it went actually the opposite way, which of course I think was nice thinking. They saw environmental issue as a tax and they wanted to provide kind of tax-free for the humanitarian industry. But sometimes we need to move faster.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone from the panel? Simon.
Yeah. Thank you. Point well taken. Absolutely. I think we need to make a bigger effort in terms of thinking sea rather than air. Yeah, and this links to the key word, which is planning. And the joint planning, which again, UNHRG is a fantastic Dubai hub is a fantastic example of that, right? We are much more together there, which allows us to do more planning. But sea versus air is an important mind shift, I think, because again, this emergency mode you need to save, which means you need to fly, is still there very much so. You know, the second thing is very simple. It's money, and you mentioned it. Money, the thing is, it's not our money. I mean, this is money which came from the donors, from taxpayers and people who contributed to, and they need to go to those who need to receive them. It's not us, it's beneficiaries. So us investing into greener solutions for air is very difficult, especially these days when all the players in the humanitarian industry are very, very squeezed. I mean, the world is no longer kind to the humanitarian industry. I think all the agencies experience that. So that's why our colleagues are not going to you and saying, we will pay for the offsetting of carbon emissions, because we cannot afford it. It's as simple as that. So if anything, and that should be regulated and incentivized and supported, I think, you know, by the major donors like the European Union, there are others. That's where the connection would be, and we would benefit from that. But the first point I made about mindset, you know, sea versus air is a very important one, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Sam.
Is it possibly about monetizing saving on a ton of CO2? Because it's difficult to apply that in a procurement process, right? So if you go CA, you save a certain number of tons, but you need to put a value on that to make sure it's efficient. So we've got donors in the room, we've got academics in the room, we've got buyers in the room. How do you introduce that equation into a tender? It's incredibly difficult. If you buy 2,000 tons of CSB in Rwanda instead of buying it in Europe, you save, I've just been running some numbers here now, you save 300 tons of CO2. But what does that matter? I mean, there's got to be a way to monetize it, to have a humanitarian standard, and then to be able to introduce it into the equation. And then it wouldn't be all that complicated either.
Thank you, Tim. And I think this is very much what we were referring to earlier in terms of policy. I mean, at the end of this journey, hopefully, you know, sooner rather than later. As I said, I think we're largely within the measurement space, but the end goal of this journey and this process is exactly that. I mean, when a policy will be formed, after we're all sort of moving into the right directions, that would be one of the results that need to come out of this journey. Like, exactly to put a number, a dollar number on those carbon emissions, so that as you then go out for your tenders and receive offers back, the carbon emission factor is part and parcel of the cost itself. There will always be, though, in this ecosystem that we're part of, a responsibility from either the legislative component or the funding component, because at the end of the day, they also have to recognize that as a saving, because your numbers will go up in terms of cost if you look at the cost in itself. So there's this mental shift that needs to happen so that the two are put together and you start seeing that as a saving, even though your absolute number is much higher than what it was before, right? So yeah, I think it's going to be a journey. I don't know if anyone would want to come in. Nika, I know you want us to keep us on time. I think we're diverting a little bit, but I think Paul had another follow-up question, and then if you don't mind, guys, we just go back to Nika and continue. Paul.
Thank you, and just want to say thank you to Simon. This is not a critique towards humanitarians. They do with the money they get, and it's tricky when you don't have enough. Why to spend on environment? And I really want to agree that I think it's the donors who must come with an obligation and with the financing. I will, however, make an example: child labor. If you have tents available, which are half the price, which are made by child labor, you will still buy the tents at double the price, which are not paid by child labor. If you have a dangerous aircraft, you will still maintain your safety level. So we have some hard requirements where we don't make compromise and we pay whatever is cost. And the question for me is, when will environment become an issue like child labor or like flight safety, that we don't make compromise? And I think we should add some little policies to start with to make like no go if it's too polluting. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Nika, back to you, as I know this as the segue to this discussion is also something that you have very close to your heart, which that
very interesting actually.
To save on carbon emissions, it doesn't necessarily always mean an extra cost, right? Back
Absolutely, to you. But I will say that I think a very fascinating discussion, because at the end of the day, I think Simon reiterated as well as other, if we define clear indicators, a clear output and outcome, or expected outcome, I would say that through a thoroughly design and planning, we might actually meet what Ben said, you know, the three elements of simple, fast, and impactful. Now, the issue here also in relation to carbon credit, carbon pricing, monetizing, which I think is a quite interesting approach that is not felt only from the humanitarian field, but everywhere, is, again, who set the rule, who set the condition and the criteria. And again, I would see that indeed a much more concrete and critical, I would say, policy that would define a much stricter, I would say, rule might help triggering a I would say, much faster change in the way we do and apply practices, especially in the sustainability arena. Now, having that in mind, I would again go to the next question, because it's very much looking at how you, and I would say all of you in the panel, would consider the criteria. So we talk a lot about green criteria, environmental indicators, defining the benchmark in that sense. But is that, what do you mean by, if we would have to define the green criteria and we would need to prioritize actually our attention to a specific indicator that would lead to eventual actual action that would imply certain, I would say, practices and action, what would be? What would be you would consider the best focus to look at?
Maybe in the interest of time, Nika, maybe you can pose this question to Dr. Schering, and then perhaps move to the next set of questions, Nika.
Okay, absolutely.
In the interest of time, otherwise we'll not be able to finish.
Sure.
Okay, so Schering, please.
Thanks, Nika. So yeah, so, you know, of course, green initiatives is, as you said, is a part of a culture, right? So what we have done is that our world, our future is our sustainability challenge. You know, that's what we have taken as our motto when we implement. Now we've got the broad vision in and the culture is set. Then we start setting up smart goals, right? Within the organization, what's going to be our carbon emission standards? How do we reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions? Can we do it by 2030? Now we took an aggressive stand. It was 28%, but now we moved to 42%. Then there are initiatives. You know, I would like to mention about this -3-degree initiative. Now, this is where we need probably more support from the regulators, right? What we realized is if you carry your cold chain products, instead of as -18 at -15, so if you can reduce the need for cooling by 3 degrees, that would mean all the cars that are on the roads of Dubai or UAE, about 3.8 million cars, all of that emissions are already neutralized. So this needs coalition support, education, and working together with producers, with supply chain operators. So then we get into collaborative initiatives like this. So this is how we have green challenges, but how we overcome is set the standard, bring the culture, bring smart goals, and then go for collaboration. This is what we are doing within the organization to address this. And similarly, it's not alone, it is with our other industry partners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Nika. Go ahead.
Okay, can I maybe other points on this, or shall we move to the next question?
I'm checking the room. I think in the interest of time, Nika, let's move to you to the next set of questions.
Okay, so next question will be specifically for Dr. Jones, university. So we know the role that university play, and especially yours, what I learned. So how can you share with us some concrete example of how the collaboration between academia and the humanitarian organization really can contribute to achieving, I would say, in the short or long term, a sustainable humanitarian supply chain?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I could give, so at CORD, so it's the Center for Humanitarian Logistics and Regional Development at the Cornell Logistics University. Quite lucky because we're working together between Help Logistics and the academic sector, and we're working a lot with practitioners. So our projects are very practice oriented, and similarly for Hankin and the Humalog Institute, they also share a similar opportunity for this. Just bringing up on the screen, actually a very concrete example. So in the past years, we've been involved in a number of projects. So for example, the REC project, we did the quantitative analysis, Hankin did the qualitative. We also have been involved with Save the Children to develop training material, which is now open source and has been, I think, since a month or so available. In addition, over the last 2 years or so, I've been working on 4 different LCAs with different humanitarian organizations, which is now coming up on the screen. I might just stand up if it's okay, because there's a lot of small points just to try to quickly explain it. Is there a way to make it the full screen? So just a quick example here. So there was 4 LCAs. The top one was with food, looking at local procurement of CSP actually from East Africa to East Africa, global procurement from Europe to East Africa by sea, and global procurement by air. And I'll just use that one as an example because I think it's quite interesting. The top graph is carbon emissions. This one here is freshwater ecotoxicity, so pollution to water, and the bottom is fossil resource use. And if you look at 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, what you see in general across most of the graphs is you see a lot of this slanted line. So this sourcing, this is the production of the item. And we're using data from humanitarian organizations. Everything is collected with the farmers, with the suppliers, with the organizations, and showing what's happening across different sectors and where do you see what the challenges are. And so we can see actually quite clearly that sourcing is a big challenge. Transport in this light blue, and when we're sending it by air, this is the exact same supply chain, but 1.3 is by air, 1.2 is by sea. And this is the contribution to, for example, fossil fuel use, greenhouse gas emissions, freshwater ecotoxicity. And we see the impact of using air versus sea, I hope that's clear, is quite large. So that's 100% of the footprint, and what is the portion that's air. And another example, in this 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, this is a conflict situation. And what you see, the purple, which is the in-country supply chain, is massive. And that's because in this situation, there's 7 steps before it reaches the end user when it enters the port of entry. So actually the in-country distribution is almost as close as the international supply chain itself. And you see that actually this conflict is really playing a role. And then in the last one, looking at fleet, the first 3 are e-vehicles. And these are 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 are all e-vehicles. This one is the Kenyan grid, which is mostly renewables. This one is the Lebanon grid, which is mostly oil. And the third is the Jordan grid, which is something in between. And you see that actually, does e-vehicles make sense? It depends a lot on your grid. So these are just small examples of what the collaboration of academia, practice, and now turning this into a paper, which is always super fun. So that's just want to show an example of what this looks like, working directly with practitioners and what you can pull out of this. Yeah.
Can I do it?
Absolutely.
So, Sarah, it's a great study. I think this is exactly what we are doing by regionalizing procurement, right? You know, like a lot of our interventions with WHOs and ICRCs is to find suppliers and qualify them and then procure from them, including easing of the logistics, you know, so source and supply chain from origin countries and regions. So we definitely, one, it empowers the communities and the local production, plus it cuts a lot of waste, right? So again, as I said, for us, it's pure way of economic common sense, right? And it actually is more sustainable. So it does well, and we would like to collaborate.
Yeah, and it just brings the importance onto data, right? And having data-driven decisions rather than decisions driven by something else.
And I would just really quickly add to that. That's actually what we found with these projects, with the REC project, that data, and also it's a very big challenge for humanitarian organizations, especially with the in-country offices. And actually getting this data is the key. Having the data available and having it easy, that's the first step. Because the data collection process is maybe 6 months and running the LCA is 3 weeks. And that's the big challenge.
Thank you, Sarah. Back to you, Nika.
Okay, so let's move to the next question then. Let's focus on procurement. And the question maybe for Ben, Simon, and Sharon, in relation to what alternative procurement strategy and practices have you explored to address sustainability challenges, but not only in relation to CO2 emission, but also taking a wider look also at waste, packaging, especially what it was mentioned before, plastic packaging, water, energy efficiency use, etc. And how do you would engage your manufacturers and supplier to promote also a much more, I would say, responsible, sustainable sourcing and procurement processes?
Ben, or you
No, I can start, or it doesn't really matter. It is a very big question, Nika, and you saw from the LCA analysis that sourcing and actually the manufacturing and the ingredients of an item can account and often account for a significant proportion of the pollution of fossil fuels usage. So what perhaps I could just briefly remind us of what journey we took in UNHCR. We started by really identifying where are the largest polluters in our range of products. So targeting which products you want to target, or knowing which products you want to target, is step number one. Step number two is that we developed a sustainability strategy for supply that's based on 5 pillars. And pillar number 3, only 3, is procurement. We started with planning as a key strategic ingredient. Pillar number 1 is how do we plan our supply chain? How do we assess what our needs are? How do we plan the network where we move our things? Pillar number 2 is the sourcing. Where do we typically go buying these things, and what suppliers do we engage with? Who are the suppliers who have the same mindset as what we are trying to implement? How can we be a bit more deliberate in knowing where we source the item? You saw that transportation is another one, especially transportation by air. So the closer to the action we can get the item, the better. Number 3, which is procurement, which is what I'm going to address, is really thinking about how you embed sustainable practices in your procurement process. So not just looking at what we used to call value for money and confuse it with cheap is no longer that. Value for money is not necessarily cheap. You have to look at an item for its entirety, especially considering how long it's going to be used for, whether it's going to be able to be repaired, what tends to break down on the item, what kind of ingredients are making it, and assess the value for money on the basis of the entire life cycle of the item, not just on the basis of the price tag. And so when between the sourcing and the procurement, we engage with suppliers who have the same mindset in their manufacturing processes, in their approach to the business. But 2, you then are enhancing the understanding of the item, not just from a procurement sort of cost perspective, but also, adding the elements of, is it really sustainable? So to Tim's point of monetizing the carbon emissions from the item, we're not exactly monetizing it as in, the trade-offs or the offsets, etc. But we are saying this item is worth X amount of money, but it's also worth X quantity of carbon pollution, and it's going to last for X amount of years in useful usage. And then after that, what will happen to it? And then we build all of that into the procurement process so that when we define value for money in the technical evaluation, we are not just looking at the standard technical specs of whether, you know, a blanket stretches or doesn't stretch, whether it's, you know, it responded to washes, etc., but also really deeply what is in that blanket and how is it made and what waste has it created in inbound inputs, production processes, outbound, you know, transportation of it, as well as the future usage of it. That's the full cycle of including the sustainability aspects in our procurement. Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly. You know, listening to you, Ben, and we are meeting all the time in different forums and so on, and other colleagues, I'm thinking, you know, why don't we have a platform where we share good practices? Platform which will be dedicated to these kind of things, because you experiment, we experiment, needs to be underpinned by data. And thank you, Sarah, for what you're doing to help us with that. But just sharing, I mean, you know, good idea oftentimes comes from, you know, from like this, from the air. And if there's a platform where you can actually pick it up and, you know, put it into practice into your own organization, that would be fantastic. So that, if I may, you know, suggest that would be perhaps, you know, one of our concrete sort of contributions to how do we move further. Let's collectively think about it. One very small example, we are really at the beginning of the road, and we should do collectively much, much, much more, certainly in IFRC. 3 years ago, when I started dealing with it, I discovered that all the Toyota fantastic vehicles which we are using are all Euro 0 emission standard, all of them, Euro 0. Very good price, excellent cooperation, you know, 100 years of working together, and so on, with Euro 0. So how can it be possible? We went to Toyota, we went to Tokyo, to Toyota City and so on. And yeah, same thing with all the other agencies. We know that. And the answer was very straightforward. Yeah, we could, of course, produce anything. We could give you Euro 6. They will be more expensive. But they will not run with the quality of fuel in your traditional theaters of operation, which is Sahel, which is Afghanistan, you know, parts of South Asia and so on. They will break down. And we, Toyota, we cannot afford to see our vehicles breaking down. You know, Toyota never breaks down, sort of slogan. So that was very interesting. Yeah, suddenly, you know, from a big manufacturer, one of the key players in the world of automaking, you get this pushback. But we didn't give up, and we kept pressing, and we kept pressing, and eventually, you know, they started moving and started giving us vehicles which are at least Euro 2, Euro 3. We are still contravening, I have to confess, some countries' regulations in sub-Saharan Africa. They accept this Euro 0 or Euro 1, while their standard is Euro 4. But we are working with them. You know, little by little, you change the world. You cannot sometimes, you know, dream about changing it overnight. So that's just one example. But sharing, I think that would be a fantastic thing to have a platform. Let's think how to set it up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think we are coming to the end of the sessions and this panel. Nika, I just wanted to maybe give you 30 seconds because I know you had a very very focused topic that is close to your heart, which is related to suppliers and what could be their role also in this ecosystem that we've been discussing. So maybe could I give you the floor to maybe introduce the subject and leave some of that in the minds of our audience?
Yes, I would say that it's obvious that I think I welcome all the idea. Thank you, Simon. I think the platform might be a very initial step forward. But essentially, it's also, I think, recognizing the co-responsibility that all actors have in order also to address these challenges. Now, it's quite interesting what actually Ben is doing at UNHCR with creating also a specific strategy for suppliers to find out, even trying to select those who are more or have or share the same mindset. But at the end of the day, we have to look from the proposition that whoever in a way produce should do also in a way or the other be held accountable, and I'm sorry to say that, also for the impact of what is produced. And there should be also manner in which a collaboration between different stakeholders could address and I would say reduce or delegate in a way this level of responsibility. And what I'm referring to is how to also look at regulation, like, for instance, giving an example of EPR or extended producer responsibility, in which is not only pointing fingers to the producer, but also finding a way where through a collaborative effort, this responsibility really actually is addressing specific outputs, which is in this case, for instance, in the case of EPR, mostly is reducing or minimizing waste, especially in those countries where, unfortunately, local authority, but even the beneficiary or local groups have not the capacity to address this issue, especially when we look at the main and increasing problem related to waste management and waste disposal. So it's a bit provocative in that sense, because the question is, shall we actually, as a group, also account for or let the supplier feel the responsibility in addressing waste along the supply chain? And that goes back also to basic concept of circular economy, in which at the end of the day, with good design, good planning, and of course commitment, the impact can be reduced. We can find alternative way, maybe not in an immediate time, but with dedicated approach in which good results, a positive result can be achieved. But as long as no one seriously take the responsibility of doing that, then I think we miss the train. This is my remark. I don't know if anyone want to react to that.
We didn't get a show of hands as to how many suppliers are in the room, but we're really running out of time. I'm sorry, guys. Maybe we can take that bilaterally afterwards. I'm really sorry.
Perhaps I could, if I can just have 1 second of doing an infomercial about tomorrow's discussion on the call to action. I mean, this is precisely why we developed the call to action, and why the call to action is not just for us humanitarians, it's for humanitarian supply chain professionals and institutions, donors, governments, suppliers, and the academia, for all of us to make that commitment, because we need to make the commitment to moving at least in the right direction. And I invite you all to go to tomorrow's discussion. I think it's at 10 o'clock, 11 tomorrow. It'll be quite exciting to see where we are and what journey we want to take on that collective platform, sharing, co-responsibility as a network of professionals.
Thank you, Ben.
If I can take 1 minute on what Simon said about collaboration among various agencies, this is working within our industry, right? I was just going through my notes. With PIL, we created a green corridor. With APMT, we are looking at electrification of all container handling equipments. We are committing 500 million towards biodiesel. So industry will move very quickly with the agencies, right? And with the help of regulators to do what is required. It makes better sense, right? So I think the collaborative efforts within the agencies and within private sector, it is actually going to help much faster, to deliver our goals.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Schering. Before I hand over to Giuseppe, I think what we're seeing here just brings me to a famous quote from Benjamin Franklin. He said, there are three types of people in the world. The immovables, those that do not get it, will never do anything about it. There are the movables, people who get it, but just don't have enough spring. And there are the people who move. And if you get enough people to move, you get a movement. And that's what we're trying to do here. So Giuseppe, on that note, back to you.
Thank you all. It was a very interesting discussion, honestly, and I think we can spend another 1 hour and a half on this.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm going just to conclude with, let me take 2 sentences. Everybody substantially recognizes that we should approach collectively the full sustainability. And the second point, let me quote Sarah, that sustainability should be systematic and not an extra. I believe that if we are conscious about this, I would not absolutely add nothing more. Thank you so much to everybody for attending in person and those colleagues and friends that are attending online. Thank you, Nika, for moderating this panel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you to all.